welcome to you all while still walking in our first underground Cyber Agora room. I can nevertheless smell the bread from Hans' kitchen. I hope you can experience the same sense. Well, yeah, thank you so much for joining. This is really great to let's say reactivate a long-standing collaboration with ITACUS. Han and Antonia can explain more about this abbreviation with a very long explanation. I'm really happy to hand over as soon as possible to the two moderators, Antonia and Han. They have impressive CVs, which I won't read out loud. You can read them from the bios that were included in the program online. But I think for me, it's enough to say these are really good people, not only good people, interesting people with aspects, angles on our planning profession that we might have overlooked literally because it's under the surface. So thank you so much for opening our eyes in the past, but also now in the present, and for sure also in the future, because we see this event as the first of some more to come. I also remind everyone of your excellent publication on Underground Urbanism. It has a different title, but you will find it, Underground Spaces Unveiled, Planning and Creating the Cities of the Future. I think that's all, that's a very good summary of what we are discussing here. So Cyber Agora is ISOCARP's window, let's say, on the outer world. We are an association of city and regional planners. We like to discuss among each other, but we also like to expose ourselves to new ideas and new people from outside. So everyone is welcome to join this Cyber Agora, but everyone is equally welcome to become member or renew membership in case you are not yet a member or you haven't renewed your membership yet. So it's only a click away to become part of this exciting society and movement for global planning rights. So without further ado, but nevertheless thanking all the people who were involved in the concept, in the preparation. Mahak, I only see your picture, but I hope you're really there. You actually helped us making this happen from the very beginning. Jonas from the Secretariat, so many other people in the room, I see Nean. So all those speakers also, thank you so much for lending your ideas for a discussion. We have a lot of presentations, but I still hope we will have sufficient time for discussion and debate. But if the debate is not concluded, and I hope not, then we would like to continue on other platforms. When you are a member, you can now use our brand new member area and start a new discussion group on underground urbanism, or you can engage in the Planners Lab, or you can create a community of practice on underground planning, whatever you want and see fit for continuing the discussion and contribute the best way you see fit to the planning community. Please do so. So it's the beginning, but certainly not the end of a very interesting topic and discussion. So as said, without further ado, over to you, Han and Antonia.
Thank you very much, Frank, for your introduction, and just to bridge from what you've been saying to what Antonia and I are going to do. Antonia and I are both members of ISOCARP, to be truthful about that. And apart from that, we are also the co-chairs of the ITA Committee on Underground Space. And Antonia will talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes. As Frank pointed out, this is really the beginning of a journey of discovery. I hope for many of you, we've tried in this first edition of the Cyber Agora and Underground Urbanism to bring you some highlights from around the world in basically the thinking on how to use or how to possibly use the subsurface beneath our cities, and what that then actually entails. And we hope that through these Cyber Agoras and through the other instruments that Frank mentioned, we can really start a new movement, if you like, on underground urbanism within ISOCARP, and using the collaboration there is between ISOCARP and the ITA, the International Tunneling and Underground Space Association. And also today we've invited a lot of people from our both our networks, so we should have an enormous mix here of people that are already interested in tunneling and underground space, so more from maybe the engineering side, but I do hope we also have a lot of people here that represent the planning communities. The idea, as I said, is to actually host 3 Cyber Agoras to start a movement within ISOCARP, and what we're really building towards is to actually create a global forum on underground space during the upcoming World Urban Forum in Poland next year. Those are our objectives. That is what we would like to work towards, and really we want to do that. We want to do that with you. In my background, you can see the book that Frank was talking about, Underground Spaces Unveiled, published by ICE, the Institute for Civil Engineers in London. But really, it's a book that was written for both the general public, those that are interested, but specifically also for planners. And we kind of proved that point when we received the Gerd Albers Award from ISOCARP in 2018 for Best Book. So it is really a book which I highly recommend to you. And if you want to know more about it, just go to thinkdeep.net. That gives you all the information about the book and about Antonia and myself as authors. And with that, I hand over to Antonia.
Thanks, Han. It's so exciting to host this first Cyber Agora on underground urbanism. We were really delighted to meet the ISOCARP crew at the World Urban Forum in Abu Dhabi. It was 2019, I guess. And we had the booths next to each other, and we said we need to really work more closely with each other. I myself am an ISOCARP member since the year 2000, as a matter of fact. I am a trained urban planner, and I kind of defected over to the engineering side. And I landed up with the ITA Committee of Underground Space, and I'm really passionate that we are pursuing that in a tunneling environment, in an engineering environment. We have been pushing the message that it's all about our urban cityscapes, that by providing and building and using and optimizing underground spaces, we can have more sustainable and more resilient cities, and we can have more space on the surface for human needs, and we can be in symbiosis, one and the other. And like Frank said, he has not really paid attention to the topic, and I know how it is as a planner. It's under the surface, it's under our radar. So that's what we're bringing to the surface, underground spaces unveiled. So let's kick off this first Cyber Agora on underground urbanism. And we really want to thank the ISOCARP crew and also Mahak Agrawal for curating this session and for having come up with excellent speakers for us here. The first one I'm happy to introduce in our first thematic block on the role of the subsurface in sustainable future and understanding the underground resource potential. We will have 2 speakers here, and the first one will be Nikolai Bobylev. Nikolai is an environmental scientist, and he teaches at the University of St. Petersburg, and he works since years on sustainable urbanization and the urban underground space. He's also a consultant to various United Nations agencies, such as UN Habitat and UNDP, and he's an associated editor of the Tunneling and Underground Space Technology academic journal. So, Nikolai, please go ahead with your presentation.
Antonia, while Nikolai is setting up his presentation, I just want to make one small comment, which I forgot to mention, which is how we're going to do this Cyber Agora. The idea is that we have these presentations. We have 3 blocks with 2 presentations. After the second presentation, there will be time for questions and answers, and we will be using the chat to see what the questions are and then answer them. After we've had the three blocks with in total 6 presentations, which will be lasting only about 6 to 8 minutes per presentation, that's when we go into the dialogue with each other, and then we can start. You can start raising hands, and I will give you the floor to engage a bit more actively. So in the beginning, it's just using the chat and getting some answers to burning questions. And then when we come to the end part, we have 20 minutes of dialogue. Then you will be able to switch on your microphones. So that just as a clarification. Nikolai, the floor is yours.
Yeah, many thanks, Han. Let me share my screen. Yeah, I hope you can see it now clearly. 8 minutes is not a long time. So I will go quickly. I will give you the key messages first, and then I will go a little bit deeper, but I hope the PowerPoint will be available. So there is a little bit more data with references that you can check the issues you might be interested in. So really there are 4 key messages. First one is that the pace of global environmental change and urbanization is that we need to act, and we need to develop more tools to enable sustainable development. 3-dimensional cities are reality. However, in my opinion, and maybe colleagues would agree or disagree with me, I think that planning tools are not there yet at full scale for 3-dimensional reality. Underground space is very relevant to many issues on global development agenda, and I listed just few. It's buzzwords: low carbon, energy, nature-based solutions. There are some more even age-friendly cities and a few more. And it is necessary to think about and plan cities in 3 dimensions, and for us as a professional community to develop tools for that. So all this is underpinned by urban expansion and population growth. But you can see in a red circle that the urban expansion is much higher, at much higher pace. Well, it's good, people becoming wealthier, they require more space, but is it sustainable? So here is a challenge. This is some of my data. I was comparing developed and developing countries, and see population densities are falling, and it has been long said that compact city is a strategy, but this is not what is happening. So we need to find some solutions and address this. Our topic which we are discussing now, it's underground space use and 3-dimensional cities, a bigger view on the global urbanization process is very much relevant to global goals. And this is agreed international development agenda. So here is the list what is particularly relevant, and there are studies back in the references. You can find more detailed studies on global agenda and underground space. So I think this is a famous diagram, first developed by Aurel Perriot, but then we added something. So this is basically addressing our first theme is underground space as a resource. And here resources are listed and they have different degree of renewability. And this is what is hot on the agenda. On the picture, on the first picture above, it's Berlin. It's actually a roof of a transport tunnel. So maybe this would be great if all tunnels and all cities would look like that. We need to plan for that, to integrate nature-based solutions in all aspects of physical infrastructure, which is a big challenge. Then geothermal energy. You see here on the picture in the middle different potentials of this energy, which is in a different location. You can combine it again with infrastructure, but again, planning is crucial here. Because we also need to plan for the future, not only for today, but imagine how the theoretical potential move into economically feasible and then to publicly acceptable. So this is an important issue, as well as groundwater. And at the bottom, Elon Musk offers us some pioneering solutions. So we also need to think that technology and innovations will be as such that more use of underground space will be required. So how we can do it? This is my studies on urban indicators, and I found that underground space was completely missing from the list of urban indicators. I think this could be one of the bases for planning, that we know more about underground space in quantitative terms, and to see different densities, combined it with well-established urban indicators. So I think that's important. And my last slide is a work of my student, very fresh. Maybe it doesn't look very professional and exciting, but I think it has some good ideas. So we plan in 3 dimensions. Here are different functions: transport, recreation, nightclub, concert, swimming pool, and then we try to look what would be the best location on a city vertical line from different point of views: economic, environmental, carbon, and so on. And we have a little bit more diagrams. So this is ongoing research. I think this is also very interesting for planning. I would welcome very much during the discussion some feedback from planners, whether it makes sense and whether it's a good idea to do this research further. So these are some of my projects which are related to underground space, and these are some of my publications. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Short and sweet, Nikolai, many thanks for keeping it short. I know you have tons to tell us, and you gave us very good glimpses into your past and current research. We'll take a few questions after the next speaker, which Han will introduce now. Thanks, Nikolai.
Yeah, thank you from my side as well, Nikolai. And indeed, I will introduce Michael Doyle, who is going to talk to us about his thoughts on the subsurface. Michael is an assistant professor at the Université Laval School of Architecture in Quebec, Canada. And in his research and teaching activities, he seeks novel ways to travel the high dimensionality of the contemporary city. He conducted his PhD work as part of the Deep City project at the EPFL in Switzerland. And indeed, he did his work under Professor Perriot. And from that time, I actually know Michael. Professor Perriot and others were the first to basically come up with the idea that the subsurface consists of 4 resources, and those resources are water, energy, geomaterials and space. And I'm sure that Michael will expand on that in his presentation and hopefully add on to that what he has been researching since. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Han. I'm going to do like Nikolai and try to share through the PowerPoint. Do you see it full screen? Good. So what I want to talk very quickly about, a bit like Nikolai did, was how I'm thinking about the urban underground, in particular in relationship to data that we have on the urban underground, and how in my work this is moving us towards a sort of n-dimensional way of thinking about the city. So a multi-dimensional way of thinking about the city. My dissertation work, as Han mentioned, was on a project called Deep City, which was conducted at the EPFL in Switzerland and was carried out notably by Professor Aurel Barriot. Without going into extensive detail on the project, some of the important points is that we were trying to look to reverse the tendency to simply come up with an urban project, certain urban needs, and then going towards the ground in order to kind of exploit it. So the idea was to reverse the paradigm and to say, how can we go from resources instead, and then start to imagine what could the city be like with thinking in terms of the 4 resources that Han mentioned in the introduction: buildable space, groundwater, geothermal energy, and geomaterials, as well as thinking how these are in sort of interactions which can be synergetic or conflictual. So underground being not necessarily something that is in every city and in every case something that we necessarily develop, but also sometimes preserve. For instance, when the underground contains an important groundwater source for drinking water, sometimes we have to say, okay, we don't touch it, and here's why. And these kinds of things are what the Deep City project was hoping to kind of offer up to urban planners to start to think, and architects to start to think about how we can urbanize differently or develop differently the city. Some of the major outputs, the list is a bit longer than this, but the ones that I specifically was working on was the development of an investigative mapping method, a matrix of interactions between the resources. So these synergies, different synergies and conflicts. We had a dissertation developed on that. I also helped develop an article that was recently published in Buildings on cost energy simulations of a commercial underground project. One of the takeaways that was interesting from that was that we realized that it really depends on the ground conditions, whether or not an underground project is more or less expensive than its surface alternative, and that it can even be more advantageous in terms of energy consumption and cost if we combine surface and subsurface together. So there are gains to be made there, both in terms of environmental questions, but also in terms of cost. And then I also conducted on the city of Montreal, which has a well-known sort of surface-subsurface commercial network of spaces called the Ville Intérieure, or the interior city, a spatial econometric analysis that showed how it was advantageous economically for commercial spaces to be located in highly centralized places. So this is kind of from urban economics. This is kind of well known, but it had never really been, this kind of analysis had never been conducted on underground spaces, which don't always, at least in Montreal, don't always develop in precisely the most central places. So we had an opportunity to compare very central and very peripheral types of commercial spaces, and saw really that there was kind of an interest economically to densify, and this brings back Nikolai's idea of capacity that he raised, to densify and render more compact around existing urban centers. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this investigative mapping method because it was an important part of my dissertation. So what we were doing was working with existing data. Oftentimes, this is an example from one of my case studies, which was the city of Dakar in Senegal. So we were looking, we met with local planners, we met with local geologists and geotechnical engineers to first of all collect data on these 4 resources and also get the kind of sense of their potential for construction based on their geotechnical properties, their use in the local markets as building materials or as infill materials, the existence of different aquifers and groundwater, of which Dakar has an important one, and geothermal energy, which you would say, Dakar, Africa, why geothermal? But it's actually for geocooling systems for which there would be a potential. So to reverse the thermal flow. We also added to that because the urbanization of Dakar has gone on for well over a century, and we were interested in seeing how certain centralities in the city, because we had these results showing us that it was more advantageous to situate underground development in highly central spaces, at least when we were talking about commercial spaces, to see, okay, how can centrality itself be a potential, even if centrality can also be bad as well as it can be good, because we could put certain, we could say, okay, certain like water treatment plants, if we were to put them underground, shouldn't actually be in those very central places. They should be somewhat peripheral. But these are the kind of questions that for us that is something we hand over to the planning community in order to think out for a city like Dakar, what would one do? What would they want to do with such a potential? Right. So the idea then was to be able to combine these different metrics into a single map that was divided into depths. So I just show an example here of 0 to 15 meters deep. We combined the different layers according to using something called the analytical hierarchy process, which allows us to simulate different scenarios where the planning community would say, building underground spaces is more important than developing geothermal systems. And so then the geothermal takes on a smaller role. Here in this example I show you, everything was pretty much equal. So the advantage to this was that it gave us a quantitative representation. So those decision makers who can tend to be, I would say, numerically inclined, who love to kind of have the number to be making somehow measurable decisions or decisions based on measures, were very pleased. But at the same time, there were some limitations to this in that a lot of times these different potentials tend to blend together. So a high potential doesn't necessarily mean it's good. It just means there's a high overlap, and therefore synergies and conflicts need to be managed, like you see here in the area around Grand Dakar and Ouakam, in the very reddish brown areas. And it also has very few layers. So we'll have these resources. We're trying to combine them together, and it's kind of what would be a small data situation, if you want, and not a big data situation, which we have much more sophisticated computational tools to help us deal with today. So I started to experiment with data from the city of Geneva on the ground, including surface data on the surface, so on existing urban infrastructure, buildings, etc. And I put them into a self-organizing model, so one that gives us sort of a characterization of the territory by which the potentials are just simply treated indexically. So like the different areas that have similar colors all have similar I would say urban volumetric properties. So from what's on the surface to what's on the at soil level to what then is in the underground with geothermal potentials and geological formations, etc. So to try to get a kind of richer, more high dimensional reading of the city. And the advantage to this is that it then can accommodate more types of data, more data and more types of data. But the disadvantage then is it takes a longer time to try to interpret. So what does it mean that certain areas of the city have a similar potential? What does it mean that there are these sort of kind of ruptures between the different zones, etc. So there's kind of an interpretive moment that the person who's working with such algorithms needs to be able to be part of with the planning community and with geotechnical experts to be able to kind of decipher what this all means. But it kind of gives at least a two-dimensional overview of something that's happening in 3, 4, or even many, many more dimensions.
Michael, in the light of time, please slowly wrap up, please.
Yes, last slide. So in thinking of this in-dimensional city, in terms of thinking through the underground as a very important series of dimensions that one will bring to planning. So to think of this urban data as kind of a form of heritage, one that we can gather and that we can try to document and also render publicly available. So my kind of recommendation would say we need to try to digitize as much as possible. So to keep these things also aware to the public, to try to organize the data in a generic form with unique identifiers for cross comparison. So, or at least with similar geographic projections for easy overlay. And to think also then of this urban data as a kind of commons, as a sort of part of the public space of the city, which belongs to everyone by belonging to no one. And to keep it as open access as much as possible. We don't propose putting demographic fields into this kind of algorithmic setup, so it's not about who lives where. This is something that can be added in a different way and would require certain ethical codes. This should be raw data and not PDF formats. And this also has an impact for education, but as well entrepreneurship, to figure out how can we get both the education community and the entrepreneur community building applications and innovating with regard to the data that would be part of this data commons. So this is kind of tying into the open data movements happening in many different cities. And then of course, combining to that, what I call, or what has been called a literacy in coding. So to be able to understand how to work with this data and not be afraid of things like algorithms and of high dimensional data sets. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. As always, a very, very interesting perspective from your side in how we can, in this case, use data to visualize where the potential lies in terms of the use of the subsurface. We are running slightly behind already, so but I do want to give you as an audience the chance to ask some questions to either Nikolai or Michael. If you have any questions, you can just type them straight into the chat now. So we'll just wait to see if we have any questions appearing. Which doesn't seem to be happening. So either, there you go. Thank you, Michael, for sharing such brilliant insights on how underground space dimensions can be explored and help provision for more spaces in city centers. However, I would like to understand that after underground development, what changes in the hydrogeomorphology was affected. Can you take that question, Michael?
Well, since what we were both working on was a mapping technique, we weren't actually making any changes. So I would say there were no, I couldn't answer this question as if it was a project that had been carried out. Okay,
right. Well, but it does pose an interesting point, which I would like to take on to more the dialogue at the end of the session, which is that I feel that the model in terms of looking at the subsurface in terms of 4 resources kind of presumes that there is something there to be used and that we can actually use it. And maybe before that, we actually need to investigate whether there are already processes happening below the surface. And that kind of ties in the hydrogeomorphology, I think. If there are already processes below the surface, that might actually inhibit the use of the subsurface rather than stimulate it. So there's this interesting dilemma between conservation, if you like, versus exploitation. And we always tend to kind of look at the subsurface in our enthusiasm and passion as something that we can always use. But there's actually a question that needs to be asked before we do so. So I think that will be interesting in terms of the debate later on underground urbanism. So let's leave it there for this first part, this first thematic block. Thank you, Nikolai and Michael. We'll obviously see you back at the end, and we move on to our next block, which has 2 speakers. and the first of which is Elizabeth Reynolds. And Liz, again, is someone Antonia and I already know for a while. We've been meeting up at various congresses over time, and we're meeting up in London every now and then. And Liz actually became very interested in the subsurface when ISOCARP and ITACUS put forward a question to planners worldwide to do some research on how the subsurface fits into urban planning. And Liz came up with a brilliant essay comparing the development of the subsurface in London with how the development of the subsurface took place in New York, and that kind of got her very enthusiastic, and so much so that she actually published a book recently on underground urbanism. So very happy that you're here with us, Elizabeth, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Han. This brings together two organisations that I'm very fond of the ITA and ISOCARP. And as Han said, when I first became involved, this topic really captured my imagination and hasn't let go of me. It's one of those tricky and overlooked urban challenges that I think is really interesting to get involved with. So let me just see if I can share my screen. I should say, perhaps firstly, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining this session from. I'm going to try and keep this very short and very light. There's a great range of speakers and time to have discussion at the end. And of course, we can always follow up on LinkedIn or in other events and forums after this. So a bit of a snapshot now on some of the overlooked underground spaces beneath our cities. I'll start with a couple of definitions. I mean, when we think about cities, we often think about the skyscrapers and we picture the things that happen above ground. But it's really important to think about the history of our cities and the layers of our cities that are physically built up over time. And Professor Edgeworth came up with a description of the archaeosphere, describing this layer upon layer that exists below our cities. It's really made ground. And we don't often think of all the things that are hidden there. There's the archaeology, the mythology, the physical soil, geomaterials, water. There's the things that were hidden and buried like waste that we don't like to think about. There is an ever increasing number of digital and other utility services, and of course, transport infrastructure, to name a few. So if we think about underground urbanism, I really see it as including not just those things that are physically below ground, but also the spaces that are undercroft. So if we think of flyovers and motorways where you create an almost underground space within a city, they share many of the same attributes. And we think about urbanism, it's the study of the way of life and the physical needs of our societies. So I believe that underground urbanism, which is the title of my book, is really about how we stitch together, as Michael and Nikolai and others have said, these different dimensions of our cities, so they become more coherent, they become more functional, and they become more enjoyable. I think the best place to start with this as a topic is to think about the big picture. So what does it mean to you and your city? What's your city seeking to achieve? And how can the subsurface either hinder or enable that vision? Have you got a city that's actually sinking due to groundwater and subsidence issues? Are you looking to electrify to cope with all the new electric vehicles or IoT that needs that infrastructure and that energy, in which case, what's happening in the shallow subsurface of your city? I'm going to just have a couple of slides on London quickly and a couple of the overlooked spaces that exist here. Apologies for the resolution on this image, but a bit of a snapshot of Big Ben here in London. But what we don't see is the new super sewer that is almost completed construction, the car parks, of course, the famous London Underground, and all these things that exist on the flip side of our cities that keep them ticking over. We're close to about 9 million people now in London, and although we actively use the subsurface, as Nikolai said, we don't have any planning system in place for proactively dealing with this as a precious resource. So although London has good geological conditions for example, for constructing new train tunnels, we're running out of physically good geology and areas that aren't obstructed by building foundations. It's a little like a Swiss cheese underneath the city, with all these building foundations coming down that new infrastructure has to weave throughout, and that becomes more and more difficult. But there's some really good adaptive reuse projects that are leapfrogging ahead of policy and happening anyway. And I think that's what happens when you're in a big, fast-paced, innovative and expensive city. People seek out spaces that are undervalued and underused. So this is an air raid shelter beneath an inner London suburb. It actually sits 33 metres below ground. It's had a few incarnations over the years, but was built originally during World War II for residents to shelter during bombing raids. And in recent years, it's turned into growing underground. And this is a hydroponic farm which produces microgreens for sale in restaurants and supermarkets around London, and they'll soon be expanding onto their second site. This started as a test project, but is growing and is quite an innovative use of an otherwise heavily compromised and difficult space below ground. But it works with the benefit of the humidity and the stable temperature and the proximity to the city centre. This is the head shaft of a tunnel constructed by Isabel Kingdom Brunel, as part of the original Thames Tunnel in London, which was one of the great wonders of the world in terms of engineering when it was first constructed, but it's now been adapted into a concert and performance space with a very light touch intervention and taken on a whole other use that it was never designed for. This is a recently consented scheme in central London to turn an underground car park, this is the ramp down, into a mixed-use subsurface development that sits below an existing park. It may well have a day spa, or it may well have retail or office uses in it. And this would be quite an innovative use of a currently underutilized space in central London, and it has approval, but I'm not sure whether or not it will get constructed. I'm part of a group, as well as ISOCARP and ITACUS. I'm part of a group called Think Deep UK, and Han and Antonia may wish to speak afterwards about their national action plan through the ITA. But we're essentially a voluntary, multidisciplinary group who want to advocate for the better use of the subsurface. We have architects, engineers, planners, geologists, lawyers, quite a diverse range, and we're all trying to tackle this issue from our own unique perspective. And I would encourage people who are interested in this topic to perhaps see if there is an equivalent group in their city or in their country, because they are growing. And it's a really great way of tackling this complex, slightly under-acknowledged area from multiple perspectives by working with different disciplines. We've so far had one workshop on planning the subsurface of our cities, one on design, one on transport, and one on social value, and all of those are available on the website tduk.org. And that's me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Liz. We've been part of the TDUK workshops as part of our ITACUS National Action Program, as Liz said. That's one way of ITACUS to bring the core message of making underground spaces part of our future cityscapes to a national level or even to a local level. So Think Deep UK is a really great group, follow them. And Liz has been an instrumental member in that group in producing workshops and in producing I think you call them blue papers or blue papers, exactly. And they're on their website. Maybe you want to share it in the chat, Liz. And that brings us to our next speaker, Felicia Atmadja. She's an architect and an interior designer and an urban designer. She recently graduated from the University of Auckland with a Master of Urban Design and she's currently working in Jakarta as the head of planning and design in a real estate strategic consultancy. And she will share with us a very interesting, the topic on how Jakarta struggles in its current geological and environment in terms of topography and so on. So Felicia, floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Antonia. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. So yeah, I hope everyone can see it clearly. Yeah. So yeah, it's always nice to do a discussion with such community like ISOCARP. So in the Cyber Agora, I would like to share with you on how to activate spaces beneath layers of the city for a better community as the cities grow upward. And today I will be contextual. I will bring you guys to Jakarta. So welcome to Jakarta. Here are some facts about the capital city of Indonesia that I'm highlighting today. So Jakarta is the fastest sinking city in the world and the most polluted city in Southeast Asia, with frequent flooding and traffic problems. Among 10 million people who live there, 60% of them don't have access to clean pipeline water. So they tap the groundwater, which caused the city to sink. And just like other cities of developing countries in Asia, Jakarta is planned to be built upward and also downward. When urban designers in many cities all around the world are reclaiming and reinventing spaces under the elevated infrastructure, Jakarta is still pretty much at the beginning of adding layers to the city, like elevated highway, elevated toll roads, and also rail lines. And Paris, London, and New York, just like Les mentioned before, cities planning and design are focusing on the move to revitalize the unused underground spaces. But here in Jakarta, a 34-year dream of the country just finally becomes a reality when it starts digging the ground in 2013, which then opened the first Indonesia underground rail network in 2019, with the hope to finally overcome traffic gridlock in the city. But soon after that, many questions were raised upon Jakarta's determination to build both up and down. Questions like, is Jakarta heading towards the right way? Is elevated infrastructure benefiting the community? Or is underground infrastructure actually safe from flooding and earthquake? Because as we can see, the spaces beneath elevated infrastructures in Jakarta right now is like a dark and dusty corridors of neglect. It is home for the slums filled with trash and quite noisy due to traffic running on the above. And it is such a waste when spaces under the elevated like this are not designed for the people. Because these spaces should not just become structures that supports the infrastructure, but they should also be an added value for the community and bring aesthetic qualities into the urban fabric. So now I will bring you to take a look on some examples of how cities all over the world manage to reinventing their underneath layers. So the easiest and the fastest method to reclaim spaces under the elevated is to do some technical intervention, low budget and easy to do, like creating interesting venues, lighting installation, urban play installation, even graffiti, anything that invites community activities to take place. And another one, this one is the pilot project, spanning nearly half mile in length, I think, through the middle of downtown Boston. And this project aims to revitalize spaces under the viaduct by creating a green infrastructure which integrated with public open space. And this one is in Hong Kong, and I think this one is very interesting because it's like very related with Jakarta's situation right now. Because this is the 7,000 square meters pet garden that was built on top of the drainage tunnel and beneath the elevated highway. So it's in the mid layer of the elevated and the underground. So, and this garden serves the multi-purpose of flood prevention, transportation, and also recreation at the same time. Also, to preserve water resources, the rainwater collected in the tunnel will be used for irrigation and general cleansing within the garden. Another example is from Mexico, a very easy tactical intervention to design a friendlier and healthier spaces, and also responding to climate change by putting a vertical garden with rain harvesting system. And this one is in Japan. It's very interesting because this is an effort to improve the space under the elevated railway by creating something like a mall, but it was more open, more vibrant, and more welcoming, more than the conventional mall. Same thing also happens in Mumbai, which is very close to Jakarta's context. So the spaces under the flyover was reinvented to be a public park with playground and jogging track, to also reducing crimes in the city. And the last one is the example that I bring from Toronto, where urbanists and landscape architects reimagine the space under the elevated expressway as the new shared public space. So the redesigning process is very interesting because it includes an extensive public consultation with the existing community and also neighborhood towns. And today it becomes a vibrant public place where visitors can experience a diverse mix of activities and programs. And I know that this example is actually very subjected to the context of Toronto. So what happened here can only happen here. But it still can be a very good example to show that how reinvented spaces beneath the elevated infrastructure can be an added value to support the community. So to keep it short, after all those examples, I'm going to focus on design intervention, since I was like working in the planning and design sections. In a nutshell, there are three strategic design intervention to reinvent and activate spaces under the elevated. For Jakarta context, it's more like we're just at the beginning. So the first one is community-led design, to make sure that we understand the social and economic context of the city, of the place. And the next one is actually to optimize the mid-layer. What I'm calling mid-layer is actually at the ground level between the elevated and the underground infrastructure to be used for integrated public spaces and green infrastructures. And last but not least is to make sure that solutions for the spaces can be affordable and low maintenance, so it will be very doable for the government. And at the implementation level, I think there are 5 recommended key moves in reinventing and activating the underneath spaces. Starting from the first process is to mapping the areas beneath elevated structures and also underground spaces that we just started to build. Then followed by study and analysis of each space, which then will lead to a focus group discussion to engage the existing community into the next step. And which is the next step is planning and design of the new public space, down to the final step of course, financing. So in conclusion, while Jakarta is still quite at the beginning to build both up and down, it is very important to start by designing spaces on the ground level under the elevated for the people. Because I think, especially in this era of the pandemic, a healthy public open space becomes such a vital need for the cities all around the world. So yeah, that's me, I think, yeah.
Thanks so much, Ximena. Sorry, Felicia, excuse me. I think that was really insightful to see these neglected spaces in Jakarta and the vision of the city and probably your own efforts in beautifying those and making them accessible and for the general public. And I think also Liz has shown that underground or infrastructures that have originally been built for other uses have now been transformed and have the potential to be transformed to really serve people in the city for recreation, for instance. So any questions from the audience for Felicia or Liz, please?
Yeah, we have one question, Antonia, for Liz, which basically says that the current underground uses have been based around services like parking, transit, etc. I would like to know what could be done to change the perception of these spaces to include uses like shared spaces, commercial and retail spaces. Liz, would you like to take that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the best way of changing perceptions is just to get on in there and do it, which is, of course, easier said than done. But the easiest way for people to think differently about some of these spaces is to see them enlivened and brightened and converted, then all of a sudden it seems possible. And whether that's through a small demonstrator test project or temporary interventions like the one that ones that Felicia spoke about, I think they all help. I'll give one example in London that's just been announced this week. Canary Wharf, which is a business district with several layers of basements that were created in an old dock and very tall office buildings, is undergoing a lot of changes with COVID and changes in the demand in terms of the number of people travelling into work. And they're turning one layer of their underground car park into a go-kart track. So it's fun, it's unique, it's attracting headlines, and will hopefully attract people to Canary Wharf who actually don't need to come into work 5 days a week anymore. And it's also a reversible intervention. So if it doesn't work, there's nothing lost. But people will thought, oh, why don't we think of doing something fun and unique like that before? So yeah, just get out there and find micro ways of testing those different ideas, and then they all seem possible.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that, Liz. Comment on Jakarta, pointed towards Tokyo, that collecting rainwater in the underground could be a positive alternative too, referring obviously to the enormous retention basins, that a basin that was built in Tokyo, locally known as the Temple, which can store enormous amounts of water. Also, the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands has a similar scheme, not as large as the Tokyo one, but at least using the subsurface to collect rainwater as well. So that's an interesting use that we can maybe look at later on. There's a question to all speakers: what are the immediate and long-term health implications of these underground livable spaces? Is there anyone who's been speaking up to now wants to say something about this?
I would just make an initial comment. Of course, I want to hear from other people. We want to hear from other people as well. But we're not promoting living underground per se. We don't want everyone to become mole people or troglodytes and live below ground. For me, it's really about how we prioritize all those different things that happen in our cities and rearrange the layers to make the most efficient use of land. But it's a legitimate question about what happens where people do spend long periods of time in windowless or underground spaces, but we're not necessarily advocating for them. Ideally, you might move, say, warehousing and storage that's at grade down to something below ground so that you can free up space at the surface.
Okay, we really have the questions pouring in now. There's one for Felicia. Thank you for the presentation. Would there have been some innovative approaches to utilizing underground spaces that you might have seen during your time in New Zealand?
Okay, yeah, such a good question. I think New Zealand, especially Auckland and Wellington, is also quite at the beginning and building the infrastructure, just like Jakarta. But in terms of underground spaces, I knew that in Wellington, some of them are being reinvented right now. The underground spaces were actually closed for several years due to earthquakes. So many people think it won't be safe to keep the activity on the underground spaces in Wellington for too long because of the frequent earthquakes in New Zealand. But in Auckland, it's pretty similar with Jakarta. They're just starting digging and building the underground infrastructure. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Felicia. Just staying with you, another question that came in about the situation in Jakarta, which you showed us about how you can actually use the spaces beneath the elevated infrastructures. And the question is, you propose to actually turn it into green spaces, into public spaces, but given the situation, would it have been better to maybe develop housing or commercial spaces in beneath those infrastructures?
So yeah, like I mentioned before, I think the mid layer between the elevated and the underground infrastructure should be used for green infrastructure, like water retention, flood retention, and then also rain harvesting from the elevated down to the underground drainage system. So yeah, I would recommend that integrated with public spaces and also commercial spaces, but not residential. I think for residentials, we're aiming to build vertically, more compact and vertical living, because it's too many landed housing right now, and we're trying to make it more compact, but the COVID situation is kind of ruin everything.
Okay, right. Thank you, Felicia. Back to Antonia.
Excellent. Our urban designers have managed to steer the crowd into a lot of questions. Keep these thoughts, and the ones we haven't answered, we will definitely take in the end after the next thematic block, which is what do cities in the present and future really need? Han, why don't you introduce our next speaker, please?
Yep, the next speaker is Klaus Wachter, and Klaus is the director of SCOUT, the Swiss Center for Applied Underground Technologies, which looks into all kinds of technologies that are required when we start talking about using the subsurface. So we're running a bit late, Klaus. I hope you don't mind if I leave the introduction at that point and just give you the floor for your presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Han, for this introduction. Let me just share my screen with all of you. Okay, you should see it by now. Han, do you see it?
Yep,
yeah.
it's good.
Okay, thank you. So hello and welcome also from my side. My name is Klaus Wachter. I'm the managing director of SCOUT, a Swiss-based competence center working on new and innovative concepts for the use of underground space. So the topic of this third group is, what do the cities really need? I'm not sure if I can cover all of that in 6 to 8 minutes, but let me present you 2 projects which I think become very important and relevant for the cities of the future. So we live in a digital world which creates more and more data every day. Even though we send all our data to the cloud, there is still a physical infrastructure required to process this data. And for some applications, the processing needs to be done quite close to the source. But as we can see in the graph, the increase of data volume is also leading to a demand in real estate. So here the demand multiplying many times in cities and urban areas, from Zurich to Frankfurt to Singapore to Silicon Valley. But free space is rare, especially in our cities and urban areas. And to tackle this challenge, SCOUT has initiated the project Edge Computing Underground, with the slogan "Below ground means new perspectives," as we see lots of benefits for placing data center underground. You can see them on the slide. I just like to comment a few of them. Going underground offers space, but also flexibility. We can build data center modular and can enlarge them at a later point. Even though we store digital data, there's still natural protection required. And that's, of course, very good if you have a rock around that. And the benefit of going underground also leads to a reduced energy demand, which allows us to build and operate data centers sustainably and resilience. So this picture showcases the concept of edge computing underground. The main idea, besides placing the data centers underground, is to transform data centers into energy prosumers. So not only consumers of energy, but also producers. Because the energy produced by data centers can be used, for instance, to heat nearby houses or offices. And in case there is no direct consumer, we can also benefit from the cooling energy provided by the surrounding underground space, and thereby reduce the energy consumption. Our joint venture, consisting of the companies Amberg Engineering, Detweiler, Siemens, and Jirek, is currently operating an underground edge data center in a real tunnel cavern environment in the Hagerbach Test Gallery. On the one hand side, this serves the future technical development and the analysis of various environmental factors. But on the other hand side, and I think that's also very important, it offers the ideal demo environment to present the concept to interesting stakeholders and to provide a touch and feel environment. If you want to learn more about this concept, please visit our website at edgecomputingunderground.com. So the second project I'm presenting to you is addressing the upcoming challenge of food security and how we want to feed megacities. Liz has also presented one of the examples. We're working on a similar approach because as you can see on the slide, there is a clear demand and a clear need to find alternative ways to produce food and to provide nutrition, because the world's population is growing, but at the same time, we significantly lose arable land. And we believe that the underground space offers various advantages. Among others, there are constant climate conditions with no hail, no droughts, and so on. And plus, it is possible to produce in urban areas. And that's exactly where we have the demand, which leads us to cut all the transport and supply chains we see today. To bring the proof of concept, we have developed and commissioned an underground green farming prototype at Hagerbach Test Gallery. We are working on the concept the concept of aquaponics. So that's a combination of aquaculture, so growing fish, and hydroponic. And the charming way is that this system runs in a cycle. So the excrements of the fish are directly fed and a source of nutrition for the plants. And the plants take the nutrition, clean the water, and the water is then going back to the fish. By that, you can save up to 95% of the water in, or keep that in the loop. We have been working on this project since 2019. We've also received the ITA award on the Underground Concept of the Year. And as you can see on the left, on the right-hand side, the fish has grown very well. We've also consumed and tasted them on site. And also the plant growth was successfully, so we can say the proof of concept is done. And with this, I would like to close my short speak, and I'm happy to receive your questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Klaus. I also want to add that ITACUS, the IDA Committee of Underground Space, is we've partnered up with Scout as they're our industrial partner, because we want to really show the world what is possible in the underground. So you've seen from harvesting energy and instead of wasting it and wasting space above ground, housing and a data set efficiently in the underground space and consuming less energy in the process is one way. And then producing food for the populations in the future, like we've seen in the example of Liz, or here in the example of Switzerland. Thanks, Klaus. We'll keep the questions for afterwards. And maybe you want to share the websites you've mentioned in the chat. And I would like to introduce Ximena Finschi. She's a Chilean architect. She's in fact the executive secretary of the Table for Underground Space, or Mesa del Subterráneo, del Espacio Subterráneo. She's also a project coordinator of the Technical Development Corporation of the Chilean Chamber of Construction. And I've had the pleasure to be with her in a webinar hosted by the Chilean Underground Space Table. And they very much, like Think Deep UK, try to bring together different professionals from the built environment. Okay, go ahead, Ximena.
Hi, Antonia. Thank you very much for the introduction. Please let me know if you see the presentation. Yes, good.
It's good.
So my name is Ximena Finschi. I'm representing the Chilean Board for the Underground Space. And today I'm going to share some initiatives we are working on to promote the developments of the underground space in Chile. So this board was established by directors of different institutions related to construction. They seek to work together in the definition of concrete short terms and actions to promote best practices for the design and construction of the underground spaces. So the objective of this board is to promote and encourage the use of underground space, its virtues and potentialities as an alternative for quality of life and urban development. So in 2020, this board was launched and 8 action initiatives were established to promote the development of the underground space. Initially, only 3 initiatives were selected to work on: the year reference, survey of cases of underground project, a diagnosis of technical and regulatory gaps for the development of the underground space, and webinars to disseminate the subject of the underground space. And due to the growing interest in this topic, 7 out of 8 initiatives were scheduled for this 2021. Today, I'm going to share some initiatives developed in 2020. About the first one, given the need to demonstrate success stories and learn about the development of the underground spaces, this initiative is established to raise and disseminate information on the most emblematic underground spaces that exist in Chile through formats of technical files accessible from free access computer platform. So we have been working about 7 months with a collaborative work methodology to collect the data. And you can see in this screenshot of the platform that we have different color dots according to the use, the destination, if it is commercial, educational, cultural, among others. And this dot also shows the exact location of the project. At your right, a banner with a technical information. You can see also a photo, a planimetry, and we have a banner on your left with the indicator and statistics and more information about this geo-reference platform. So we have 3 categories of basic information we call the fundamental fields. These are the data of a primary nature focused on knowing the actors involved in the design and construction, as well as statistics like year destination, use, accessibility, among others. And also we have the complementary field that these are like secondary data that seek to provide relevant information or highlights of the project. We have also the annexes, for example, a photo gallery, a planimetry, into videos, among others. So with this information, we raise indicators on the development of these spaces. And now I'm going to present some preliminary indicators. So this week, we include the international cases, and we have 10, all in Europe. 114 cases in Chile. 20 of them are in regions, not in the capital, Santiago. And the typology, the predominant type of use is schools and culture. And in second place, the commercial cases. So some examples of the indicators are the location. Like I said, most of them are in the capital. The project according to the use, if it is private, public, or mixed, because we want to visit them. That's why it's important to know. According to the type of the project, if it is new or rehabilitated, we know that the cities don't have so much space, so it is really important to know how they can rehabilitate these spaces. And the financing type, if it is private, public, or consent. Just a few examples of emblematic cases. This is a cultural center under the governmental palace, Palacio La Moneda. This is a boulevard under a municipality or a town hall. A cultural center, you can see over here. And this is a university also. So about the second initiative, in 2020, a diagnosis of gaps and regulations regarding to the underground space is carried out, where interviews were conducted with key industry players related to planning, design, construction of these underground spaces. For example, academic, constructions, companies, engineers, architects and designers, clients, constructors, and we have already worked for 5 months. And finally, as a general conclusion, a summary metric is made with the counts of gaps most addressed during these interviews. So this proposal seeks to generate a line of action regarding a series of initiatives facing the main challenge identified. the development of a multidisciplinary vision by the actors involved in the life cycle of an underground project. Same gaps that ITA and ITACUS relevate. So we need really brilliant planning to solve those problems of cities growing faster, and we need to be efficient and effective during the life cycle of our projects. So in February of this year, the final report of the project conclusions was delivered to a technical working group which seek to establish a proposal of actions to correct the gaps. So this is some of the initiatives we worked in 2020, and we hope to keep working on them this year. And we hope to activate in this 2021 4 more initiatives, a degree work program with the academic, proposal to public authorities. We want to make some meetings with them, with public and private authorities, in order to deliver the document of conclusions and proposals and work together to close the gaps. Visit existing underground spaces, and publication and dissemination in mass. We are working on our work on a website, and the underground architecture competition, we're going to keep it for 2022. So for this year, we want to incorporate Latin American and international cases in this year reference platform. Also, about the second initiative, we have this group that is currently working on a technical definition of underground space and define the group strategic vision. It is very important to integrate the perspective of the community, the environment and authorities. And we want to keep organizing a series of webinars that highlight and discuss the topic of underground space, about the different perspectives of design and architecture, construction, the client vision, urban impact, among others. We have a newsletter with opinion columns. You can see the webinars, national and international news about the underground space. And now we're working on podcasting with relevant industry players. And we have also this website that it is in construction, and we hope soon to have an English version, www.espaciosubterraneo.cl, that means underground space. And so I'm finishing. Why not be partners? Our cities are fighting the same problems. So after this Cyber Agora, we hope we can work together to raise and identify more international cases and have global indicators. For us, this platform is a useful tool to understand how the underground has been developed. So we invite you also to participate in our webinars and working groups. Thank you very much.
Impressive, Ximena. It's amazing what you guys have been building up in Chile in a short time. And it was very interesting to see also some of the amazing underground spaces that are already realized, also in terms of cultural facilities. I'm dying to visit one of these days. And yeah, thanks a lot. And it's great that you're building up a website also in English, because I think that will broaden, of course, the audience that you will reach. So any questions to the last 2 speakers, Ximena and Klaus, please? And generally, we will also look what else is still in the chat and hasn't been answered.
I'll ask a question. Sorry, I'll ask a brief question to Ximena. The basic question is, what was the incentive behind this initiative?
Yeah, in Chile, we have a lot of underground projects, and the community and the authorities sometimes reject them because they don't know the benefits. So it is important to promote the virtues and potentiality of these spaces. And also Chile have earthquakes. So we have a really good technology and quality of construction. So we think the underground, we can reach it, we can make projects also. So it is important for us now to promote best practices and also disseminate the good attributes of these spaces.
Okay, thank you for your answer, Ximena.
Question, please.
Yeah, can you raise your hand, please? There's an option to raise your hand, and then I can actually give you the floor, because I can't see who's asking to speak.
I've seen only the chats.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. For this last one, she said that there is a board for the underground space. If this board is belongs to the government, and if this so, if it is coordinating with the national government responsible for urban planning, as long as it is maybe proposes some land uses or master plans for the very busy area underground in the city. Did you get my question?
Yeah, I think I get it. This is not a governmental board. This is like institutions related to construction that work together in these initiatives. We want to work with authorities because we think that the public policies need to understand that they need to put urgent matters about how they can incorporate these underground spaces as a solution, for example, for commercial projects, for infrastructure. And we're open to work with international, for example, universities or another boards. And an example of that is we want to raise more in the underground cases. So if you're interested in know more about this board, you can send me an email. I'm gonna put it here in the chat.
Great, thank you.
And I'm not sure if I...
No, you put it in the chat, and in the meantime, I'm going to take a question from Judith Reiser, which I think is a very important one, which says, how does land ownership work vertically? And I'm just going to take that one personally to answer, because I find it not only an interesting topic, but I've seen some very recently some very interesting developments in Belgium, where I do some work as well. Basically, and I think this is when it comes to underground urbanism, that's why I'm taking this question. The land ownership regulations we see, or the legislation we see worldwide, a lot of it is basically not taking the subsurface into account. So effectively, it means that who owns the land at the surface also owns the land beneath, which then basically brings us to the premise that the subsurface has been privatized without us even realizing it. Now, there are exceptions to that rule, and a long time ago, Japan, I think, was one of the first countries to actually say, no, look, we need to change this. So they more or less made the subsurface public space beneath a certain level below buildings. It was Hong Kong and Singapore that then followed on. Singapore has now introduced legislation where they basically say that for infrastructure needs, you have to consider the subsurface first, and you can use only the surface and upwards if there is no other way to do it. So that's interesting as well. Indonesia has changed its land ownership legislation to allow use below the surface, and most recently Belgium has changed their civil code in April of this year, and it will become effective from the 1st of September of this year, allowing for partial ownership below the subsurface. So what we're actually seeing worldwide is a movement to start thinking about how can we actually undo what wasn't there intentionally, but the effective privatization of the subsurface. And that actually brings something to the surface, which is, when we look at the subsurface, when we look at underground spaces, should we actually start looking at it as the subsurface being a common? Should we look at the subsurface as belonging to everyone, and therefore needing guidance from the government in terms of its use or whatever? Because it seems to me that part of the puzzle is that the subsurface is mostly not seen by planners, but also by policymakers in terms of something that they should be dealing with. And I'm just wondering from the audience or from our speakers, if somebody would like to comment on that. Not all at once, otherwise I'm going to point to someone and just ask them to comment on it.
If not, I think it's very valid what you said, Han, but we have also a question on the psychological approach that was addressed to all, which is also a field that's being addressed a lot in terms of developing underground spaces. So how do humans feel rain and sunlight, and how does it affect them psychologically? Anyone from the speakers wanting to address that? Maybe Liz or Michael or.
I'd be happy to say something unless Liz wants to go. I mean, Liz gave a very nice detailed response in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I'm looking for some other links. So if you want to talk, Michael, I've got some others, links to some good academic work I can try and post in there.
Great. Yeah, so I guess this is sort of my personal approach to this kind of question. I would say perhaps the comparison with the pandemic is, I would say, not what I would hope for underground space development to be compared to, in that it's not, the idea is not to build spaces where we force people to be for long periods underground. I think each country has different regulations in terms of what we can put underground and under what conditions people can be for long periods underground, either in employment, or I remember in Switzerland it was completely forbidden for there to be residential spaces underground with no access to daylight. So I think from a design standpoint, the important thing is a choice, I think. So to be able to allow the opportunity for people to go back outside relatively easily, to have access to certain lighting qualities necessary for ensuring certain circadian rhythms, and in terms of accessibility, also avoiding kind of dead ends. So we get kind of into this is what we saw. This is what I saw in Montreal, was that some of the most successful underground spaces were the ones that were very easily accessible from the surface, even if they were, and from neighboring places, even if they were 2 or 3 stories underground, to have a kind of feeling of being surrounded by people all the time and not being kind of alone in a dark, narrow space. So I think it's a design problem, and not necessarily one that I think can be easily reduced to kind of if you do this, then people will feel this kind of approach.
Yeah, I think the circadian rhythm is a good one, and there's some really interesting research out there on that. And I also really like the comment from Frank, why not oblige shoebox retailers like IKEA to build underground, including parking, if still acceptable in urban areas? What is your guys' opinion on that? Or any other burning questions from the audience? In light of time, it's getting very short, unfortunately.
Antonia, can I have a brief comment?
Absolutely, Nikolai.
Yeah, just on all the questions. On psychological research was done in Singapore, and young George Christopoulos would be a good author for that. For land ownership, was a very interesting article on underground cadastre in Korea. Several years ago. It's not underground space or planning community, it's a cadastre community, so that's lawyers actually. And regarding Frank's question, it's very challenging to force people, you know, to do such things that we do not use, for example, a daylight surface for retail. But I think it could be a right angle to look at it through legal terms. But I think the challenge, if we go this way, the challenge, there would be many people raising their hands regarding safety. And that if we you know, terrorism and all the things, explosives. So I think that if we go in this way, then we will need to address this, the whole package for regulations and enabling this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nikolai. That's very valid. I'm seeing here the path in Toronto is also a good example of the use of underground spaces, correct? where we combine really transport with recreation, with offices, with restaurants and so on, and really serve a lot of purposes in the communities. Are there any?
I think Frank made an interesting statement at the beginning, Antonia, when he said that he hoped we would have so many questions that they would automatically overflow to a next Cyber Agora. I think that's basically what is happening. Just small comment from my side, if I may. Nikolai just said it's very difficult to enforce people to actually start using the subsurface. Again, what is happening in Flanders at the moment, their strategic spatial plan actually says that after 2040, they basically want to go to a zero land use policy. They do not want to add any more build-up spaces to the land available. And this is driving planners towards a study on verticality. And what we are trying to do there now is to actually look at verticality in urban areas, not just in terms of looking how to build up, but especially to start looking how to build down. And I think that's a good example of a way how you can try to start influencing this. But what we're also finding is that it's not self-evident. And I think it's the discussions that we could have within ISOCARP that would actually help the planning community to further understand all the mechanisms that come into effect when we talk about the use of the subsurface.
And what you just said, Han, exactly, that's what we called this session. The next level up is down. That is also basically our mission statement or vision statement of ITACUS. And we want this to be an entry into a series of agoras on urban and underground urbanism. There will be a next one coming up during the ISOCARP annual Congress in November with a different set of speakers, with a different focus. Stay tuned for that. And we will, of course, you're welcome to connect to the various speakers with further questions if we haven't been able to address them now. Please stay in touch. And thanks a lot to all the speakers. Excellent job. Thank you. Is Frank in the room still and wants to say a final goodbye to everyone, or the ISOCARP Secretariat? If not, no, okay.
Yeah.
Frank,
final
words.
Say, yes, just to say lovely discussion. Thank you so much. I think this is a good start, and we will continue. And let's build this underground urbanism movement layer by layer. Let's not go too deep, too fast, because we have also seen that underground doesn't mean to be really underground, which is a great takeaway. So thank you so much to everyone who contributed, and see you next time around above or under the surface. Thank you.
See you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.